In 1886, a small group of Apaches led by Geronimo found themselves trapped in the arid Sonoran Desert. The men were exhausted from their long trek under the scorching sun, and their supplies had long since run out. The experienced leader stopped near a completely dry riverbed, carefully examined the curve of the sandy bottom, and began to dig into the ground with confidence. The U.S. cavalry was only a few miles behind, so every minute counted. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how this survival skill saved entire groups as they crossed the open desert. Without knowing these secrets, no one could have survived the harsh conditions of the Southwest in the 19th century. You can't even imagine how complex and well thought out the indigenous people's survival system was in such an extreme climate. Many historians are still amazed by the speed with which these people found hidden water sources. In this video, we'll reveal the forgotten techniques that made warriors completely independent of standard supply routes. This knowledge turns conventional wisdom on its head regarding how humans can interact with the most hostile environments. Many facts about these unique methods remained obscured by official 19th century military reports for a long time. The U.S. Army spent enormous resources searching for wells, while local residents extracted water right from beneath their feet. We'll examine in detail every sign that indicated the nearby presence of underground streams. You'll learn the exact amount of time it took an experienced tracker to provide his group with this vital resource. This information will forever change your understanding of the history of survival in the Wild West. What if I told you that everything you think you know about waterless wastelands is completely wrong? To regular Army soldiers, the Chihuahuan Desert seemed like a deadly trap, offering not the slightest chance of rescue. To the Apache, however, this same territory was a complex but perfectly readable map of hidden resources. Survival here depended not on luck, but on a deep understanding of the laws of nature and local geology. For years, tribal leaders taught the younger generation to recognize the slightest changes in the landscape so they would not be at the mercy of external circumstances. Chief Mangas Coloradas understood perfectly well that control over the territory was impossible without knowledge of hidden water sources. In the 1850s, his people successfully controlled vast expanses precisely because of their ability to move beyond known bodies of water. Soldiers were tied to major rivers and army wells marked on maps. Mangas Coloradas groups could traverse hundreds of miles, appearing in places most unexpected to the enemy. This gave them a tremendous tactical advantage over the slow-moving American troops, who were dependent on supply trains. The fundamental difference lay in their very perception of the surrounding arid landscape. European settlers saw only endless miles of dust, rocks, and parched earth before them. The indigenous people saw a complex ecosystem in which every element was intricately interconnected with the others. A mistake in interpreting this system could cost one's life, so knowledge was passed down with absolute precision. The absence of visible moisture on the surface never meant it was completely absent underground. The climate of the Southwest imposed its harsh conditions year-round. Daytime temperatures could soar to extreme levels, quickly depleting any traveler's reserves of strength. At night, however, a sharp cold set in, requiring shelter and the conservation of energy. Traveling in large groups demanded precise timing between resupply points. Mangas Coloradas planned routes so that campsites always coincided with hidden underground currents. Scouts played a key role in ensuring the safety of the entire tribe during long treks. They would go several miles ahead to assess the condition of the soil and vegetation. These men were responsible for the lives of the women and elders, so their skills were honed to perfection. Every route was planned with seasonal changes in the levels of underground currents in mind. The desert was constantly changing, and the trackers had to adapt to these changes on a daily basis. Preparations for crossing open terrain began long before the group actually set out. Food supplies were carefully checked, and the physical condition of each participant in the long trek was assessed. The route was discussed at a council meeting, where the experience of previous journeys through the area was taken into account. Paths were chosen that featured natural landmarks, indicating the presence of moisture beneath the surface. Such preparation eliminated the element of chance and ensured the community's high survival rate. For American troops, such a level of integration with the natural environment was completely out of reach. Officers attempted to apply standard military doctrines developed for the forested regions of the East Coast. They dispatched large convoys carrying barrels, which quickly became easy targets. The Army's logistics crumbled in the face of the harsh realities of waterless canyons and endless sandy plains. It was precisely this logistical impasse that forced the generals to seek new ways of conducting campaigns. Mangas Coloradas exploited these enemy weaknesses to defend his ancestral lands. He lured the army deep into the wilderness, where their supply trains inevitably got bogged down or ran dry. Meanwhile, his units quietly replenished their supplies and continued their rapid advance. This strategy of attrition proved incredibly effective throughout the many decades of the conflict. The land itself became the chief ally of those who knew how to understand it. The ability to find hidden reserves was not merely a useful skill, but the foundation of the culture. This knowledge was woven into stories, passed down through generations, and became part of the people's identity. Every new leader had to prove their ability to guide the community through the harshest of trials. Preserving these traditions allowed the culture to survive despite immense external pressure. I'd be very interested to hear your perspective. Do you agree that adaptation is more important than strength? Share your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about how ordinary plants saved human lives? The key to finding water was the ability to read the flora, which served as an infallible indicator of underground water flows. In the vast desert, certain species of trees and shrubs simply could not survive without constant access to water. The Apaches called these plants green beacons because they stood out against the gray landscape. Poplars, willows, and mesquite trees became the main landmarks for any experienced tracker on a long journey. Chief Cochise, leader of the Cochise group, masterfully applied this knowledge in the Dragoon Mountains. His community could hide for weeks in rocky gorges where there wasn't a single open stream. Cochise knew for certain that the presence of narrow-leaved poplars always indicated the presence of moisture no deeper than 2 meters. These trees, with their broad green leaves, were visible from afar and served as reliable landmarks. His people headed straight for these green patches, avoiding fruitless wanderings through the canyons. The mesquite tree provided completely different, but no less important, information for travelers. Its roots can penetrate to a depth of up to 15 meters, reaching the deepest aquifers. For the Apache, dense mesquite thickets meant that moisture was present, but it would take a long time to reach it. However, the very presence of this plant indicated the overall moisture content of the soil in that particular area. This helped determine the boundaries of an invisible underground aquifer, hidden beneath a thick layer of scorching sand. It was important not only to find the right tree, but also to assess its current condition. Bright green, supple leaves indicated that the groundwater flows were very close to the surface. Yellowed or curled foliage signaled a drop in the level of underground water reserves during a severe drought. The trackers carefully examined the bark and branches to determine whether it was worth expending energy on an excavation. This analysis took only a few minutes, but the success of the entire journey depended on it. There was a huge difference between a dry riverbed and a place where moisture came right up to the surface. A dry riverbed could stretch for many miles, remaining completely barren and dusty along its entire length. But where moisture accumulated underground, the sand took on a darker hue. In such places, indicator plants grew in denser clusters, forming natural green islands. Cochise used these islands as supply stations when planning his diplomatic missions. The region's geography demanded incredible precision from Chief Cochise in establishing his supply chains. The Dragoon Mountains were a complex labyrinth of rocks, where it was easy to lose one's bearings. Relying on these green beacons allowed his units to move quickly between safe campsites. American patrols often passed by these unremarkable thickets, unaware of their value. This ignorance left the army blind in a world that was completely open to the indigenous people. The plants also indicated the correct spot to begin excavation at the bottom of the canyon. Excavations always began at the base of the largest trees, where the root system prevented the soil from crumbling. The roots acted as a natural framework, allowing them to dig a sufficiently deep pit without the risk of the walls collapsing. In addition, the tree roots served as a kind of natural filter, purifying the liquid flowing up from below. This significantly accelerated the process of obtaining a clean and drinkable water source. Knowledge of indicator plants was universal among all groups inhabiting the region. These principles worked equally well in the lowlands of the Sonoran Desert and on the highlands of the Colorado Plateau. They formed a unified system of survival that allowed people to navigate vast territories with confidence. This knowledge was passed down through hands-on experience, as experienced warriors took young scouts under their wing. This is how an unbreakable bond was formed between people and the botanical diversity of their homeland. Today, Many of these green beacons continue to grow in the same historic locations. They serve as living monuments to an era when the ability to read nature was a matter of life and death. Studying these plants helps modern researchers better understand the migration routes of indigenous peoples. How difficult do you think it was to pass on such precise knowledge without a written language? The answer to this question lies in the Scouts' unique morning rituals, which we'll discuss next. What I am about to show is not included in many modern survival manuals because of its complexity. The second most important sign of nearby water was the environment's behavior in the morning. At dawn, the desert was briefly transformed, revealing its most intimate secrets to the attentive observer. The difference between nighttime and daytime temperatures created unique conditions for reading the ground in tracks. Experienced trackers used these brief morning hours to maximum effect. Lozen, an outstanding female warrior and strategist from the Chiricahua group, had mastered this art. She was known for her ability to find safe routes for her brother, Chief Victorio, during the most difficult moments. At dawn, Lozen would venture far from camp to study the subtlest changes in the structure of the sandy soil. She looked for places where nighttime dew lingered on the rocks, a little longer than usual. This slight dampness on the surface always indicated a powerful source of cold and moisture directly beneath the ground. The tracks in the sand, left at dawn, served as a reliable compass for Lozen's detachments. The morning movements of the desert's inhabitants always led toward or away from hidden reservoirs. A trained eye could spot where these invisible trails intersected in certain depressions or at the base of cliffs. If a multitude of tracks converged at a single point in a dry riverbed, it was a sure sign to begin excavations. Lozen could read this geometry of tracks faster than any other scout in her unit. Time played a critical role in this complex process of morning terrain analysis. The sun quickly heated the surface, erasing the fragile evidence of nighttime activity and evaporating the life-saving dew. The tracker had no more than 2 hours after dawn to piece together an accurate picture of the terrain. Lozen moved swiftly, moving from one suspicious area to another without a single mistake. Her incredible intuition and experience had saved Victorio's group from thirst dozens of times. In addition to dew and tracks, at dawn one could notice faint wisps of vapor rising above certain areas. In the cool morning air, the warm earth released microscopic particles of vapor where the soil was damp. These barely noticeable misty patches hung low over the ground for just a few minutes before the sun fully rose. Only someone who knew exactly where to look in low light could spot them. This required absolute concentration and keen eyesight, for which Apache scouts were renowned. For American soldiers, the early morning hours were merely a time of difficult awakening and preparations. They rarely paid attention to subtle changes in the landscape, focusing instead on checking their weapons and equipment. Their camps were noisy, which completely disrupted the natural rhythm of the desert and masked important signs. Lozen, however, blended into the morning silence, becoming an invisible part of this harsh world. Her methods represented the highest form of adaptation to the most inhospitable conditions on the continent. Knowledge of the morning signs allowed her to avoid unnecessary excavations and conserve precious physical strength. Digging blindly in hard soil meant wasting energy that was needed for the journey ahead. Lozen never erred in her choice of location. Her excavations always yielded the desired result. This reputation made her an indispensable advisor at all of the tribe's military and diplomatic councils. Her opinion was often decisive in choosing the direction for the next march. The tactic of reading the dawn desert was especially important during periods of severe summer droughts. When green plants shed their foliage and ceased to be reliable indicators, the morning signs remained the only hope. Dew and the convergence of invisible trails were not dependent on the season. They obeyed only the laws of geology. This made Lozen's method a universal tool for survival in any climatic conditions. If you're interested in unique historical facts like this, be sure to like this video. How did these hidden clues help locate larger natural reservoirs? In the next chapter, we'll descend into the deepest canyons to explore an amazing natural phenomenon. Want to learn a secret that will change your life and your understanding of desert geography? It wasn't always necessary to extract water through hard labor from beneath layers of scorching sand. In some areas of the Southwest, nature itself created ideal reservoirs, known as tinas. These are natural stone basins carved out by spring runoff in the hard rock formations of deep canyons. Knowledge of the locations of these hidden reservoirs was one of the indigenous people's key strategic advantages. Chief Victorio, one of the most brilliant tacticians of the 19th century, masterfully utilized a network of such tinnays. In 1880, his small detachment evaded pursuit by several cavalry regiments for months. Victorio plotted his route exclusively through the highlands, where these natural basins were located. The soldiers, tied to the rivers on the plains, could not pursue him into the Rocky Mountains due to a lack of resources. The tinnas provided Victorio's men with everything they needed, while remaining completely out of the enemy's reach. The descent basins is unique and warrants a separate, detailed examination. They form at the bottom of narrow, winding canyons where direct sunlight barely penetrates. Thanks to the shade and the coolness of the rock, the evaporation of liquid in the tinnas occurs incredibly slowly. Even at the height of the summer drought, hundreds of liters of the purest water can remain in such deep gullies. Victorio knew the locations of dozens of such reservoirs in what are now the states of New Mexico and Texas. To protect these precious reserves from animals and debris, the Apache often camouflaged them. The surface of the stone basin was covered with dry branches, rocks, and a layer of thorny shrubs. This artificial cover not only hid the reservoir from prying eyes, but also further reduced evaporation. When a party approached such a site, the camouflage was carefully removed and then put back in place. This careful preservation ensured the survival of subsequent groups that might follow the same route. American scouts sometimes found the tinnas, but rarely could they assess their true size. Often they would scoop out the top layer, unaware that the narrow neck of the basin concealed a vast interior volume. Victoria's people knew how to retrieve the resource from the very bottom using bound agave stalks. They used these natural reservoirs as secure bases for extended rest periods before setting out on new treks. This allowed them to regain their strength in complete safety from sudden cavalry attacks. Control over the tinnas allowed Victorio to dictate the terms of his guerrilla warfare. He could lie in wait for weeks in the mountains, while the enemy's thirst-stricken troops tried to track him down. As soon as the soldiers retreated to major rivers, Victorio would launch a lightning-fast strike and vanish back into the rocks. This strategy drove American generals to utter despair, thwarting their plans time and again. The natural reservoirs became an insurmountable barrier between the indigenous population and the regular army. However, reliance on the pools had a downside that left them more vulnerable. If the summer turned out to be abnormally dry, even these deep rock basins could run completely dry. At such critical moments, the community had to descend into the valleys and risk encountering patrols. Victorio always had a backup plan in case the main mountain springs dried up. He sent his best trackers to search for underground streams in the dried-up riverbeds. The ability to balance the mountain reservoirs with the underground springs of the plains was what defined a successful leader. Victorio combined the talents of a great warrior with those of a wise guardian of his people's natural knowledge. His journey shows how deeply the history of military conflicts was intertwined with geography and climate. Do you know exactly how the pathfinders found water on the plains when the mountains ran dry? The anatomy of a dry riverbed, or arroyo, was a distinct and complex science of survival. At first glance, it was simply a long sandy channel left behind after the spring floods. But to the experienced eye, the riverbed was divided into distinct zones with completely different physical properties. The water never completely drained from the arroyo. It merely sank beneath a thick layer of compacted soil. Understanding the hydrodynamics of these invisible flows was the key to the group's swift and successful rescue. The most important feature of any meandering channel has always been its outer bend. When the spring flood carries enormous masses of water, centrifugal force pushes it toward the outer edge of the bend. It is precisely there that the water erodes the deepest pits in the bedrock, creating hidden underground pockets. After the surface dries up, these pockets continue to hold significant volumes of water deep beneath the sand. The inner bend of the channel, by contrast, always consists of alluvial sand and remains completely dry. Geronimo's group, which we mentioned at the beginning, always sought out precisely these deep outer bends. They carefully studied the angle of the bank to determine the deepest point of the hidden pocket. There was no room for error, as digging into the hard, rocky bottom was unbearably difficult. Precise calculations allowed them to reduce the time spent on excavation several times over, conserving precious energy. The excavation site was chosen where the shadow cast by the high bank protected the soil from the sun. The temperature of the sand also served as an excellent indicator to confirm the correctness of the choice. The tracker would lower his hand into the top layer of sand to sense the slightest temperature changes. Moisture beneath the ground always cooled the soil above it due to the capillary effect. If the sand at the depth of a palm remained hot, the excavation was immediately halted, and the group moved on. If, however, their fingers felt cool, this served as the green light to begin full-scale work. The capillary effect played a huge role in sustaining the entire ecosystem of the dry arroyo. Moisture slowly rose through the microscopic pores between the grains of sand, without reaching the surface itself. This process created a compacted, moist layer underground that was easy to identify during excavation. As soon as a tool touched this compacted layer, the trackers knew their target was very close. The next steps required incredible precision so as not to destroy the fragile structure of the sandy walls. The danger of flash floods always loomed over those who chose to set up camp inside an arroyo. Rain falling dozens of miles away in the mountains could trigger a deadly torrent rushing down the dry riverbed. This wall of mud and rocks would appear suddenly, sweeping away everything in its path without warning. Therefore, experienced leaders never allowed their group to sleep at the very bottom of the excavation. Excavations were carried out quickly, and camp was always set up on high, safe terraces. The contrast between the lifeless surface and the moisture hidden beneath it astonished the first European explorers. They could not believe that a real underground river flowed beneath a layer of scorching dust. This geological phenomenon dictated the entire logistics of travel throughout what is now Arizona and New Mexico. Anyone who knew how to read an arroyo gained unlimited freedom of movement on this vast chessboard. Understanding the anatomy of the riverbed was as important a weapon as a rifle or a trusty horse. However, simply finding the right spot was only half the difficult and labor-intensive task. Successfully extracting the liquid required a special tool and a specific technique for working with the soil. Are you ready to find out exactly which object was the trailblazers' main tool in these harsh conditions? What you are about to see will forever change your perspective on primitive technologies. The Apaches did not use iron shovels or the cumbersome pickaxes found in the cavalry's arsenal. Their primary tool for extracting hidden resources was a special digging stick known as the yuku. It was an incredibly simple, yet perfectly balanced tool, designed specifically for working with dense soil. Knowing how to use this tool properly meant the difference between life and a painful death in the desert. Chief Jew, one of the leaders of the Nendaha group, paid great attention to the preparation of these tools. The wood for the yuku was selected from the hardest varieties of mountain oak or sturdy juniper. The end of the stick was carefully sharpened with a stone knife and then charred over a slow fire until it turned black. This hardening process made the tip as strong as bone, preventing it from breaking on hidden rocks. Every warrior carried such a tool, considering it no less important than a bow or a spear. The technique for digging a pit differed radically from the way we are accustomed to using a standard shovel. The tracker did not simply dig straight down from the top. Instead, he worked with careful circular motions. The tool was inserted into the sand at an angle, after which the soil was gently pried loose and removed. This prevented the walls from collapsing, which was the main problem when excavating in loose material. The sand poured out very easily, so the angle of the pit was calculated with mathematical precision. The goal of the excavation was not simply to create a deep pit, but a so-called filtration well. When the tool reached the moist layer, the digging slowed down so as not to stir up the mud rising from below. Pathfinder, Jew always taught his men to leave a small layer of clean sand at the bottom. This sand acted as a natural filter through which water slowly seeped into the excavated basin. The liquid emerged purified of large impurities and was immediately safe to drink. Maintaining the stability of the well's walls required immense patience and physical endurance on the part of the craftsmen. In some cases, the walls were further reinforced with flat stones or woven shrub branches. This prevented the sand from crumbling back into the water and allowed the liquid to be drawn out much more quickly. The digging process itself could take place in extreme heat, when every movement sapped one's strength. Therefore, the skill lay in minimizing effort, while maximizing the efficiency of each individual movement. American soldiers often tried to replicate this process using their steel entrenching tools. However, their crude tools only destroyed the delicate structure of the sand, causing the edges to collapse repeatedly. They dug too quickly and impatiently, ending up with nothing but a pit full of muddy sludge. Their lack of understanding of the technique for creating a filtration well rendered their efforts completely futile. In the hands of an experienced warrior, The Yuku worked with greater finesse and precision than any factory-made shovel. After completing the excavation, the group had to wait a certain amount of time for the basin to fill. This wait was the most psychologically challenging moment, as the exhausted people stared at the empty pit. Leaders like Ju maintained strict discipline, not allowing anyone to approach the well before the appointed time. Only when the water rose to the required level did the process of carefully drawing out the water begin. Would you like to know exactly how long this entire life-saving cycle took? An experienced tracker spent exactly 2 hours on the entire process of locating and collecting water. This was not a random number, but a time frame refined over generations, essential for the group's survival. Knowing this time precisely allowed the leaders to plan their treks so that people wouldn't collapse from exhaustion. Every minute of those 120 was strictly allocated to the various stages of this complex task. During this time, the fate of dozens of people stranded in the middle of a scorching wasteland without supplies was decided. The first 30 minutes were always spent reading the landscape and selecting the ideal spot in a dry riverbed. The tracker assessed the position of the sun, the presence of indicator plants, and the external bends of the arroyo. This was a phase of intellectual work, where a mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences for everyone. Checking the sand's temperature and analyzing the morning signs were also part of this brief period. As soon as the spot was confirmed, the most physically demanding phase of the operation began. It took about an hour to carefully dig out the soil using a special wooden tool. The digger worked at a brisk pace, but without unnecessary haste, to control his perspiration. Dehydration while working in the heat could be fatal, so his movements were smooth. The depth of the excavation was usually between 1 and 2 meters, depending on the density of the aquifer. By the end of that hour, dark, moisture-saturated sand would finally appear at the bottom of the well. The remaining 30 minutes were spent waiting for the moisture to seep through the sand and fill the reservoir. It was a time of strict discipline, when weary people sat in the shade and waited. The sand filter worked slowly, collecting the liquid drop by drop and purifying it of suspended particles. Interfering with this process at an early stage would have ruined all the work that had been done. Only after a full 2 hours had passed was the water ready for safe extraction and distribution. This precise time frame allowed the group to pace themselves and avoid fatal exhaustion. If the process had taken longer, the people might not have been able to withstand heat stroke. If the water had been collected earlier, it would have been undrinkable due to the abundance of sediment. The 2-hour rule was the gold standard of survival for all Chiricahua and Nendaha groups. It worked flawlessly for centuries, saving generations from severe droughts. The U.S. cavalry lacked such timing precision and operated in conditions of constant chaos. When soldiers found moist sand, they tried to extract water immediately, without waiting for it to filter. Their pits quickly silted up, and the murky sludge caused stomach upset and a loss of combat effectiveness. A lack of patience and strict procedures made the regular army extremely vulnerable in the desert. The Apaches, on the other hand, turned waiting into an exact science that guaranteed survival. When the 2 hours were up, the process of carefully extracting the clear liquid from the bottom of the well began. For this, they used small bowls woven from grass and coated with pinyon pine resin. The water was scooped out milliliter by milliliter, so as not to damage the fragile bottom of the sandy reservoir. This process required a steady hand and maximum concentration from whoever descended into the pit. Children and the elderly always drank first, followed by the warriors and scouts. The 2-hour rule confirms the title of this video and demonstrates the highest level of adaptation. This was not a primitive trial and error method, but a refined system of engineering and logistical calculations. Knowing this time frame provided confidence, even in the most desperate situations of pursuit. Understanding how to obtain water was important, but knowing how to conserve it was even more crucial. Chief Nana, despite his advanced age, was a recognized genius of logistics and planning. He understood that it was not enough simply to extract a resource from the ground. It had to be properly preserved for a long journey. The system for purifying and transporting water was thought out down to the smallest detail and allowed for no waste. Special basket-like jugs, known as tuss, were used for storage. These were true masterpieces of engineering. These containers enabled Nana's detachments to make incredible forced marches of 50 miles a day. Making a tuss basket was a complex process that required special skill from the women of the tribe. First, a dense, jug-shaped base, with a narrow neck was woven from flexible willow or sumac twigs. Then, the inner and outer surfaces were carefully coated with hot pinon pine resin. The resin hardened, forming a completely watertight layer that prevented the liquid from evaporating. The narrow neck further protected the contents from dust and insects while on the move. Before pouring water into the tuss, it had to be further purified to remove even the finest grains of sand. Nana used natural filters made of crushed charcoal and bundles of dry grass for this purpose. The charcoal effectively absorbed unpleasant odors and purified the water of any potentially harmful impurities. The grass trapped larger suspended particles, making the liquid clear and completely safe to drink. This multi-stage filtration system ensured the group's health during grueling military campaigns. Carrying the filled baskets required special skill, as the water was very heavy. The tuss jugs were equipped with special straps made of rawhide, which were worn across the forehead or over the shoulders. The jug's shape was designed to minimize sloshing while running or riding at high speed. Minimizing noise was critical for the unit's covert movement behind enemy lines. American metal canteens clanged loudly, giving away the soldiers' positions from many hundreds of meters away. One of Nana's most cunning tactics was creating secret water caches along the retreat route. While preparing for a raid, his men would dig wells in advance and fill resin-coated baskets. They buried these caches in cool sand in secluded spots, creating an invisible supply line. When the group was fleeing pursuit, they didn't have to spend 2 hours gathering water. They simply dug up a ready-made reservoir, quickly quenched their thirst, and continued their rapid advance. The army was completely unaware of this sophisticated system of caches and baskets. The generals believed that the Apaches possessed supernatural endurance and could go without drinking for weeks. In reality, Nana's logistics were simply more sophisticated and better adapted to local conditions. His bands traveled light, knowing that a pre-stashed supply awaited them at every stage of the journey. This system made them completely elusive to the cumbersome military machine of the United States. The art of creating tuss and organizing caches was passed down from generation to generation as a great treasure. These skills were the foundation of the independence and freedom of movement of the indigenous peoples of the Southwest. They demonstrate a profound understanding of materials and the physics of liquids in desert conditions. This knowledge allowed the tribes not only to survive, but also to engage in active diplomacy. Access to reliable sources of water was not only a matter of survival, but also a major political asset. In negotiations with representatives of the U.S. government, control over water often became a central topic of discussion. The diplomacy of the tribes of the Southwest was based on a clear understanding of who controlled the region's key water reservoirs. Without guarantees of access to these lands, any peace treaties lost their practical meaning. The chiefs used their knowledge as leverage against the slow-moving American officials. In 1872, Chief Cochise conducted complex and historic negotiations with General Oliver Otis Howard. Cochise agreed to cease hostilities only on the condition that a reservation be established on his ancestral lands in the Chiricahua Mountains. The chief's main argument was that these mountains contained hidden springs and tainas essential to his people. He categorically refused to relocate to the arid plains of New Mexico, where the community would be dependent on government rations. General Howard, realizing the strategic deadlock of the war, was forced to make these concessions. The 1872 treaty became a rare example of a diplomatic victory based on a deep understanding of geography. Cochise secured access to vital resources for his people, ensuring their autonomy. American negotiators often failed to grasp the true value of certain rocky tracts of land. They measured territory in square miles, whereas the Apaches measured it by the number of hidden springs. This difference in the perception of space allowed the chiefs to negotiate better terms for their people. However, these diplomatic successes were often short-lived due to growing pressure from settlers. When farmers and ranchers learned of reliable water sources, they encroached on reservation boundaries. They built dams, polluted riverbeds, and destroyed the green landmarks that guides relied on. This disrupted the fragile ecological balance and deprived the indigenous population of their traditional means of survival. Violations of water treaties inevitably led to new outbreaks of armed conflict in the Southwest. The loss of control over their ancestral water sources became the main cause of the resumption of guerrilla warfare. When the U.S. government rescinded the Cochise Treaty in 1876, many groups refused to comply. Deprived of access to the Chiricahua Mountains, they were forced to retreat into the deepest and harshest wilderness. It was then that survival skills in dry arroyos and the 2-hour rule became critically important. Diplomacy had failed, and ancient instincts for adaptation came to the fore once again. The shift from diplomatic negotiations to constant survival on the run severely drained the communities. Chiefs had to devote enormous effort not to politics, but to the basic task of providing their families with water. This struggle for every sip of water became a symbol of the final years of resistance in the Southwest. The knowledge that had served their prosperity for centuries was now being used for the desperate defense of a fading world. And it was precisely this knowledge that saved Geronimo's group in that very scene with which we began our story. Let's return to 1886, to the scorching Sonoran Desert, where Geronimo had stopped by a dry riverbed. His men were on the verge of physical exhaustion, and the U.S. cavalry was closing in with every passing minute. At this critical moment, all their ancient knowledge came together, reading the landscape, choosing the right bend, and the 2-hour rule. The Yuko tool dug into the sand until skilled hands reached a cool, moist layer. Geronimo stopped the digging at exactly the right moment to allow time for the water to filter through. For the next 30 minutes, the exhausted group waited in absolute silence for the well to fill. No one panicked or tried to scoop out the murky sludge before the allotted time. The discipline instilled by the harsh climate prevailed over the natural instinct to quench their thirst immediately. When clear liquid had collected at the bottom, the process of organized distribution of the life-saving water began. Women, the elderly, and children received their portions first, regaining their strength for the rest of the journey. This single dug well saved the entire group from certain death. Under the scorching sun, the warriors filled their tarred tusk baskets, securing a supply for the next several dozen miles. When the advance guard of the American cavalry finally reached this dry riverbed, the Apaches were no longer there. The soldiers found only an empty pit at the bottom of the arroyo and tracks leading further into the endless sands. Knowledge of the terrain had once again triumphed over the numerical superiority of the regular army. Geronimo's journey ended with his surrender in late 1886, but his legend lives on. He and other leaders proved that the human spirit is capable of adapting to the most incredible conditions. Their resistance was based not on firearms, but on a profound respect for the laws of nature. They lost the political war, but they remain forever the unsurpassed masters of survival in the history of the Wild West. Their legacy is a lesson in how knowledge triumphs over brute force. Techniques for finding water in a matter of hours allowed entire generations to live in harmony with the wilderness. These skills saved families, helped them avoid captivity, and ensured their freedom of movement across vast territories. Today, the dry riverbeds of the Southwest are silent, but they remember those who knew how to read their secrets. Humans are capable of incredible things when they understand the land beneath their feet. We see that the tactics for locating hidden water were a complex, sophisticated system, not merely a matter of chance. From reading morning tracks and indicator plants to precisely calculating the timing of water diggings, every step was carefully calibrated. The stories of Geronimo, Lozen, Cochise, and Mangas Coloradas show how deeply survival was woven into culture and diplomacy. People did not fight against the desert. They became part of it, using nature's hidden reserves to protect their people. Which of these ancient lessons on survival and adaptation to nature do you think remain relevant today? In the comments, suggest topics for future videos on indigenous culture that you'd like to see. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new and exciting historical explorations.